Can I tell you a secret that completely changed how I paint portraits? The less I stress out about a detailed, precise block-in, the better my finished painting turns out. I know that sounds backwards. You're probably thinking, Chelsea, shouldn't we want our paintings to look good at every stage? I mean, yes, we do want that. But here's the thing. If your block-in looks super detailed and polished, you're probably already overworking it. And that tight, careful energy, it's gonna carry through into your finished portrait, no matter how hard you try to loosen up later, because you'll be so afraid to paint outside the lines that you'll totally skip the bold brushwork that makes your portrait look like it flowed effortlessly out of you instead of looking, well, worked to death. So today I'm going to show you why you don't actually need a super precise block-in to make a beautiful portrait, because I'm going to share my secret weapon for making sure my portraits look good no matter how I start off. And I would know. I can't tell you how many students I've had work with me specifically because, as they put it, they were amazed at how I could take a portrait that looked like such an ugly mess at the start and bring it to such a beautiful finish. So in last week's video, I covered how to get accurate and symmetrical facial proportions the easy way, which is going to help you actually get the essentials of the face onto the canvas without overcomplicating it. I'll link that video above just in case you missed it. But here's where most painters get stuck. They look at their block-in with those simple lines, those rough shadow shapes, and that loose kind of diagrammatic quality, and they panic because it doesn't look like their subject yet. So they jump in and they start refining, adding details to the eyes, smoothing out all of the brush strokes, trying to make every stage look finished. And you know what happens? The painting gets tighter and tighter, more controlled, more labored over. And by the time they're done, they have a portrait that has a lot of good detail, but when you step back and take it in as a whole, it's clear that the pieces just aren't fitting together the way that they should. The shadows will look way too light in some areas, way too dark in others. The highlights of the eyes might have been painstakingly placed, but they look garishly bright. Oftentimes, what we've put down, our drawing and our values, are close enough to what we need, but they look just off enough that the whole painting looks wonky. So how do we fix things when our proportions are off by mere millimeters, or when just enough things look just a little off that it's impossible to know what's correct and what's not, or where to even begin to fix things? Let me show you. This is the exact process I use to check my block-in and make sure everything is solid before I move forward. And by the way, if you want a full list of the resources and shortcuts and exercises that I like to use to get an accurate portrait likeness, I have an entire guide listing out everything I use, along with links to video demos. It's linked below, but I'll put a QR code up here for you to scan in case you're watching on a TV. All right, so let's get started. For this particular trick, all you need is your painting, your reference, a phone, and then some kind of photo editing app. I'm going to be using Photoshop on my computer for this because it's a pretty standard tool for most fine artists to be comfortable with. But you can do this same essential process using other tools like Procreate on the iPad or even free Photoshop alternatives on your computer. I've even helped a lot of my students do a completely analog version of this. The exact shortcuts or processes may differ depending on what tool you personally use, but the principle remains the same. Okay, let's dive in. First, I'm grabbing my phone and taking a photo of my painting. The key here is to get as square on as possible. So I don't want any weird perspective distortion that's going to throw off my comparison. So I'm holding my phone here parallel to the canvas so that I'm making sure that the top and bottom edges are as even as possible in my viewfinder. Photo taken. Now I'm going to crop this on my phone to remove any background. I just want the painting itself edge to edge. If it's not perfect, I'm just going to err on the side of leaving a little bit extra background in versus removing some of the painting. If I've done a good job of making sure the margins around the canvas aren't wider at one end versus another though, this should be pretty easy to get more or less right. But you can always use the perspective crop tools on your phone to account for an angle that was slightly off. So I'll go ahead and show you right now how I would account for that. So let's say that I took my photo from this angle. So here I have a lot less extra room at the top of the painting versus the bottom. So when I go in to edit this, I'll go into my edit settings and then crop. I'm going to switch over to one of these perspective crop tools, and I'm going to try and even it out until, again, I have roughly the same amount of buffer on the top as the bottom. And that goes for like each side, basically same amount of buffer on each end of the painting. And while this isn't like totally perfect, it actually worked surprisingly well. Now, I want to make a quick but important note. This is made way easier if you're working off of a reference that's the same aspect ratio as your canvas. So if I know I'm working at an 8:10, I should go ahead and crop my reference to a 4:5 or 8:10 aspect ratio before I start painting. Then I can make sure that I place the subject in the frame the same way I want them placed on the canvas. If you skip this, you can still check everything, but it simply takes a little bit more trial and error, as I'll show you here in a minute. But for now, let's assume you are working off of a reference that's the same proportions as your canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and airdrop these images over to my computer. So first thing I'm going to do, now that I have these two opened up side by side, is I'm going to go ahead and actually put them in the same document. So I'm going to take the image of the painting and I'm going to Command A or select all, Command C or copy, and then I'm going to go over to my reference document here and I'm going to say edit paste or Command V. Next, obviously this is way too big. So Command T brings up the transform tool, or you can go to edit and then free transform. And you'll see this puts a blue box around the image. We're going to use that to our advantage here. I'm going to scroll out until I can see the boundaries of this blue box. And then I'm simply going to take it until it's like almost at the right proportions. Now, to make this just a little bit more viewable, I hit Command 0. This just makes the image take up the full screen. And I don't need this one anymore, so I can go ahead and close that. So now I just have the one image, and to get it fitting perfectly on screen, all I'm going to do is select Shift, and then I'm going to bring these edges that are just over the sides until they're flush with the boundaries of my document. So using these little side anchors to pull it in, you can hold Shift while doing this and adjust each side individually to make sure that it fits the image spot on. So top, bottom, left, right. Now, if there's any slight perspective distortion based on how I took the photo, I can right click and use the skew tool to adjust individual corners until everything lines up perfectly. So I can see that there's this little bit of buffer here in the bottom right-hand corner. With the skew tool activated, all I have to do is grab this corner and pull it out until I don't see that extra little bit of background anymore. Now I can see a little bit of this in the upper right as well. So I will repeat this process and I'll just take a look at the bottom right as well. And with that, it looks like I have this fully lined up. So I'll go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so now I have my painting overlaid directly on top of my reference at the exact same size and position. This is where it gets interesting. So in my layers panel, I can click this little eye icon to toggle in between the view of my painting and seeing my reference. And when I do this quickly, clicking on and off, something really magical starts to happen. The image starts to dance. See that? The areas that are dancing where things are shifting as I toggle, those are the places where my painting just doesn't quite match my reference. But look at this. My major proportions, things like the overall shape of her head, where the nose, the chin, the overall placement of the features, it all looks fairly proportional. But there are some shifts that really need to happen if I want this painting to match this reference. Now, here's the second check I do, which winds up being even more revealing and helpful for this situation. Specifically where some things are going pretty well, but some things feel really wrong and you need to know exactly what they are and how to fix them. So I'm going to keep my painting layer visible, but I'm going to drop the opacity down to about 60%. So over here in the layers panel, we have opacity at 100% currently, and I'm just going to slide that down till we're at approximately 60%. Now I can see both my painting and my reference at the same time. This shows me not just if things are off, but it shows me by how much they're off. One thing I noticed right away is the way I've set this up. Things like the top of her head, that's in roughly the right place. But when I start to get into things like her eyes, nose, and mouth, they're really wrong. This is why I said earlier that it's really helpful if you have a reference that is designed for the exact same aspect ratio as your canvas. Because you can see I kind of started with this anchor of the top of her head being correct, but I made the rest of her take up much more of the canvas than she takes up in this reference. So this isn't the end of the world. And this is actually going to give me a great opportunity to walk you through how we fix this when maybe your reference doesn't perfectly match your canvas in terms of their size and aspect ratio. So one more time, I'm just going to hit this Command T or Edit Free Transform, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And I'm just going to start to scale this down until her face takes up about the correct amount of real estate. And I'll see this specifically because I won't see any of those weird places where I see two sets of eyes or two sets of lips, or I see the hairline in one place and then again someplace else. And this one is definitely more of an art than a science. So I'm actually going to give myself permission to kind of shift things around until that I think that it's reasonably correct. I think that I'm in pretty good shape. So again, I'm just gonna toggle back and forth between these to sort of see how I'm doing. Now, one thing I've noticed is that I've made her face much more vertical in my version. See how it kind of looks like she's tilting her head as I toggle back and forth between these? So this is something that I could potentially just go in and fix in the painting, but in this case, I think what makes the most sense, given that I'm not super attached to the exact plan for my reference, is for me to actually rotate the image of my painting reference until they match a little bit better. So again, I'm just going to hit that Command T for free transform. And then if I hold my cursor just to the outside of one of these corners, there's this little corner set of arrows that pops up. So you can see here, if I go inside, it's a regular pointer. If I'm kind of hovering over the boundary, it's just like a very clear up and down slider. But if I go toward this corner on the outside, you actually see these two different sets of arrows. And what I'll do is I'll just start to drag this a little bit until it matches a little bit better. And I think this is already an improvement. But again, as I go back and forth, I'm still seeing that the eye here on this side isn't dropping quite as low as it needs to. And now I kind of have a decision to make. Do I continue adjusting this until they overlap pretty reasonably? Or do I decide that the painting actually needs to be changed? In this case, given how well the other landmarks of her face are lining up, things like her chin, lips, bottom of the nose, the other eye, the top of the head, I would probably err on the side of this eye. It just needs to be fixed. Here's one thing that I want you to take away. I don't need to do this with a fully rendered painting. Even if my block-in were at the very rough, simple, and let's be honest, kind of ugly stage, I can still tell whether or not it's accurate and the structure is solid. And if it's solid, that means I can paint with total confidence from there on out. And not only that, but when I go back to adjust my painting later, I can proceed from feature to feature with pretty precise notes on exactly how the drawing needs to shift. For example, in this particular painting, if I zoom in a little bit more here and I toggle back and forth between these, and I can even use this opacity slider to help me out a little bit more, I can see that in the painting version, her eye line is sitting right about here. And where it actually comes in the photo reference is several millimeters lower. So right away, I have very quantifiable data as to what actually needs to change. So I'm not just kind of going on vibes or a hope and a prayer. And this is the reframe I want you to make. When you look at your block-in and you think, this looks terrible, what you should actually be thinking is, to what degree is this off? That removes us from getting stuck in a frustrated, emotional place with our painting and instead puts us into a really solution-oriented state of mind. We see the solution and just how easy it is to get there. And that's exactly what you want. And this brings me to the two most common mistakes I see tripping painters up as they dive into a new portrait. Mistake number one, they keep their analysis to the surface emotional level. So they don't actually drill down to exactly what needs to change to make the portrait better and to make it the way they want it to look. And then mistake number two, they don't check their drawing early or often enough. So they wind up committing to way too many details before they actually know that those details are going into the right place. Then they get to the end of the painting, they realize what needs to change and feel totally overwhelmed at the idea of having to redo all of that effort. So here's what I want you to understand. If the early stages of your portrait look ugly or off, this is totally fixable. And it's probably better than being accurate, but having such a detailed underdrawing that you're afraid to really let loose with stylistic brushwork that'll go outside the lines and cover up all of that careful planning. The painters you admire, Sargent, Zorn, Sorolla, this is how they worked. They didn't spend weeks on a meticulous painting. Of course, they weren't using Photoshop to check, but they got down the essentials, they corrected early and often. So when errors inevitably came up, they caught them before it felt too late because they were in such a groove of looking for those drawing errors before proceeding into detail. So now we've covered the complete foundation. We've covered proportional landmarks, and we have a way to identify and fix proportion issues. But there's certainly some other tips that help to bring it all together. And there's one piece that everyone wants to know, which is how do you capture the essence of a person, that intangible quality that makes a portrait feel like a specific living person with fewer, more confident brushstrokes. That's what I'm going to be diving into in my next videos, because once your structure is solid, it's time to make magic. Here's the thing. Knowing these techniques is one thing. Actually integrating them into your practice is another. That's why I created a free drawing exercises cheat sheet that breaks down exactly how to practice these concepts so they become second nature. It includes video demonstrations for every exercise, plus a clear progression so you know exactly what to focus on at each stage in your development. The link is in the description, or you can scan the QR code on screen to download it right now. And here's what's really cool. When you download this cheat sheet, you'll get an email from me directly inviting you to share what you're currently working on and where you're feeling stuck. I read every response and I really love seeing what all of you are painting. I wish y'all could just put them in the comments, but having you email them to me helps me create better content for you. And often I can offer specific guidance to you on what to focus on next based on what you send me. So grab the cheat sheet, try these techniques on your next portrait, and then hit reply to that email and show me what you're working on. I genuinely want to help. Remember, the ugly stage isn't something for you to fear or skip past. This is your foundation for painterly expressive work. So trust the process, verify your structure, and then build to a finish of the painting with confidence. Go grab that cheat sheet and I'll see you next week when we talk about all of those additional little tips to help you capture the essence of a portrait with confident brushwork. You've got this. Go make something beautiful, even if it looks ugly at first.